And Morrissey, of course, very literate and eloquent. He always gave, he probably still does, really good interviews. Hi, you're watching The Manc Meets with me, Robert Graham. So I came to Manchester when I was in my late 20s, probably, mid to late 20s. And I actively chose it. I didn't arrive by mistake. I was growing up in Belfast in the mid 70s, and the bands I'd be reading about in the NME, because I was a music obsessive from about the age of 12. The bands I'd be reading about in the NME just wouldn't come near Belfast because of the Troubles. So coming out of that and landing up in Manchester, where every major band, American, British, whatever. So I moved here and I was teaching, and on the side of that I was writing about music for City Life, the listings magazine at the time. And around that time I spent about 9 months managing the Membranes, the punk band. And through that got to know a lot of the bands on the local scene at that time. And there would be bands like Big Flame, who were great. I think they were all architecture students, so they went off and became architects. Another one was Big Ed and his Rocking Rattlesnakes, a rockabilly band fronted by a very entertaining Glaswegian guy. And at the same time, you had bands that are now, seminal, legendary bands that were just coming up to breaking through. So I interviewed Mick Hucknall prior to Simply Red getting a record deal. And then at the same time, during that 9 months or so, the Smiths' first album came out. So I got to go and interview Morrissey and Marr. So Johnny Marr, very passionate about music and very knowledgeable about music. And Morrissey, of course, very literate and eloquent. He always gave, he probably still does, really good interviews. I remember going to interview Ian Jury, and he was at the Mandela Building, I think it was called at the time, the Poly Students' Union. And I went up to, the artist space, the green room, as they say in the theatre. And he was on a running machine, limbering up for the concert. And, great company, very entertaining guy. And then the other end of the spectrum, I remember reading this, interviewing this 80s kind of synth star called Howard Jones, doing a phone interview. And I innocently asked, what his influences were, which, you would say to an artist, to a band. And he said, I haven't got any influences. I said, well, surely everyone has influences. And he got very stroppy and hung up on me because I was pressing him to tell me what his influences were. So that was the other end of the spectrum, where it was less fun. But mostly it was really good fun talking to all these people. I just thought it was a real privilege, because there I was, a high school teacher working out in Wythenshawe, and outside of school I'd be doing an interview like this every couple of weeks. So it was great. I suppose I got into writing because I was just always a passionate reader. I loved reading fiction from when I could move, really. Well, from when I could first read. I got into writing short stories. And then what I've produced is one previous novel, and then between that, 2006 and now, a novella, a very short novel, 2 short story collections, and then I've written or co-written 3 creative writing handbooks. Well, the former boy wonder, the viewpoint character in it, his situation at the start of the novel is that he's been a music writer, quite successful for about 25 years, toured the world with bands, this, that, the other, not at home nearly enough. And now he's beached at home because his work is starting to dry up. One of the aspects that I'm really pleased with is that I've made Manchester high enough in the mix that it's almost a character in its own right. So I've used a lot of Manchester locations. Scenes happen in the Sky Bar at Cloud 23, in the Hilton. They happen inside Central Library, outside of the Central Library, at venues that are gone, like the Gallery on Peter Street or the Boardwalk. The building's still there, but the venue's gone. And then in Chorlton itself, I've used Beach Road, and that helps to characterize Lucy, Peter, the narrator's wife. The Former Boy Wonder, you can find it at various online outlets and local bookshops. Chorlton Bookshop, I'd recommend if you're in South Manchester. They got loads of copies in there. And I'm hoping that copies will be in Waterstones by now too. You've been watching The Manc Meets with me, Robert Graham.